Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel simply is Discerning What is True. Like I was talking about, I don't know if many of you guys know that I follow Phil Langdon. I've been talking with Phil Langdon for, I guess, 2.5 years, maybe 3 years. We've done many videos together, and it's interesting that the title that I'm talking about tonight is called Identity, which is the next chapter of this particular book, simply called Psychology and Kabbalah. In the times in the past, how Kabbalah is kind of not a recent phenomenon, but it's in a way is a way of seeing something in what we call a different perspective. And psychology was actually revealed through what we call astrology. When you were born, that type of thing, and what star, what time of day. Also has to do with your parents. And me and Phil Langdon have talked about simply the 12 disciples, which represent the 12 noetic signs, which are actually within your own mind. We don't know a whole lot. Naturally in the past, someplace wasn't. They didn't say psychology. You see, they didn't do that. But he also wrote stories to reveal deeper things. This is part of the what we call mythical approach, or what some would call it riddles. And unfortunately, so many people in our day have taken what I call a literal framework, and basically, the Bible is not a literal book. I mean, it's a book, but it's not revealed in a literal terms. And this is why there's so much confusion today. These people take this very seriously, as though it is fact. No, it's not fact. And those who are Christians have no inkling or knowledge of understanding this, because they go to church and all they're taught is a literal framework. There was a guy named Moses. There's a guy named David. All this type of thing. There was a literal temple in Jerusalem. All these type of things have been, and this is part of the, I would call programming. And I grew up in the church all my life until around basically over 40 years was in my life. I actually went to seminary and was pursuing a church history degree. And then something didn't seem right. And I was in a particular class with I had the opportunity in this particular seminary I was at. There were 2 to 3 professors in different areas. There was one in patristics, which simply means early church history. There was one in what we call dealing with the Reformation. And then there's other ways. Another one would be simply is dealing with what I would call key characters in the past, not in the past, but in recent phenomena, not phenomena, but recent times, like Karl Barth or Dietrich Bonhoeffer, of those types. And so most colleges and universities, seminaries don't have, 3 church history professors. And it deals with what I call a lot of different things. But what happened simply is that I remember being in one of the classrooms, and I come from various different types of Christian churches. I'd been involved in a Southern Baptist church, independent Baptist, what they call fundamentalism, which is based upon a lot to do with Scofield. And then I also, at that point, my parents left that church and went to a Nazarene church, which leans more to the Methodist perspective, which is just basically a derivative of the Methodist particular approach, which Methodists broke off from the Episcopalians, with John and Charles Wesley. Do you do tarot guidance? No, ma'am, I don't. I don't do any tarot I have the tarot cards here, right here. Let me show you that. I have the tarot cards. Um, Me and Phil Langdon did one of our first broadcasts. This was like 3 years ago. We we did that broadcast dealing with the cards, and I will say this much: that this card here is revealing simply what we call when you become young and you don't know anything. In other words, you just simply you just walking along here and you notice the guy here. He's not even paying attention, and he's called a fool because he's going to fall off. He's going to fall. He's going over a cliff. He's not even aware of that. You see, so that is what happens here when we are here. We incarnate. We're not privy, as if we're here the first time or a few times. We're not privy to what I would call any kind of wisdom to understand that type of thing. So this is what happens with people. They don't understand. You'll notice the cards also are yellow in background, which has a lot to do with the sun, sun, to quote unquote, to reveal the makeup of the background of the person's life. But anyway, I've got off on a tangent here. So let me get into the reading here to do with identity. Again, this, we have to understand that psychology is basically a new field for mankind. But it was also dealt with long ago, you see. And you can read certain books in that way. And if you have any interest in that, I can tell you certain books, such and such. But, I'm semi-retired, and I'm not married, so I have plenty of time to read and get into some things like this nature. And I also read off the internet because, books like this cost a lot of money. It add up real quick. And I've already been involved in the Zen movement before I got into this. And before that, I was involved with Goethe. Goethe was something that what we call the fourth way, which was dealing with him and Peter Ossietzky, who was a Russian, and Goethe was a Georgian, and I don't mean Georgia here. I'm talking about in Georgia. There's a small country, south of Russia, big time Russia. There's a little small country called Georgia. That's where he came from. And then I was with the Zen movement with Richard Rose. Richard Rose had already passed away, and so there were others leading that. And I was in that group, what we call, with being able to observe yourself, what we call the observer, and the observed. And what that is pointing out simply is that there's a higher being within you. Okay, and I eventually left that group too because I didn't see the importance of that. And this is how we progress. Is simply is we go so far and realize something's not right here, and that's your common sense, but that's also your logical way of looking at things. And when you do that, you choose to say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. Something's not keying up. And me and Phil have talked about what we call the two, with Zen, they just talk about what they call Zen, which is just one perspective. And that's not all correct. Let's see. But it also identifies with the observer and the observer and the observed, which reveals there's something within you, within your own frame up here, your house. I mean, your head. I'm sorry, not my house. Anyway, let's get into the book here. Identity. In the first 2 years of bodily growth and development of the psyche, we can observe how an individual learns to live within physical limits as they gradually extend their sensor motor range of actions and cognition. By the 13th month, most babies can stand up and a few weeks later walk. New skills are added each day, and with them, the infant world slowly focuses into an ego-centered existence in which everything is related to what the child thinks, feels, and does. This phase of narcissism, as it is called, is crucial because it builds up a yasada body image that gives the individual a sense of independent existence. And let me just show you in this particular book, if I can find a good picture of it. There's one here I like that's actually colors, and but I never seem to find it so quickly, as you say, when you're live and in color, as they will say. Yeah, this is part of it right here. And you'll notice it's in different colors, and I hope you can see this as I bring it up and back down. And these little points here are certain things. You know, the higher part is what we call the kelter, or a keter, I should say, and that's the crown. And the colors are just differential between what the separation between them is what it is. So, and Phil Langdon suggested this book. He told me this was probably by far one of the best books out there. It really hammers that, unlike other books out there. So, anyway, we kind of got off the deal here. So, bear with me. So, in a child, this does not matter because it is not possible, not responsible for itself. You see, indeed, such a egocentric idea is necessary in order to find out what and where they are in relation to the otherness, as it is sometimes termed, or the rest of the world. In the so-called normal child, the transition from infant to toddler marks not only the beginning of real mastery of the body and a deeper exploration of the world about them, but also a lengthening of the psychological umbilicus that holds the child to the mother. Here, the narcissistic tendencies of wanting one's own way and yet needing and depending upon the mother, which comes into conflict. Such tensions can, under certain circumstances, build up into a major crisis, one of many an individual has to face at critical points of growth. If the balance of the psyche is good, then the tree can afford to be flexible and adjust. If it is not, because the tree is too far towards the side of structure, one's leaning to this side or leaning to the other side, you see, then a harder set is made within the emotional and conceptual complexes building up there. If, in contrast, the tree is inclined too much the other way, towards the dynamic pillar, you see, you want balance in that tree. You see, this is like a tree of life, so to speak. It's not a tree of good and evil. It's a tree of life. You see, we come here. Most of us come here many times, reincarnate here. We don't really develop until many, many, many times. Okay, so we are on the tree of good and evil, and that good and evil is this whole idea simply of self-righteousness. You see. So this may, despite a docile persona, surface in later life in a crisis when regression to this earlier stage can occur in order to avoid reality. The alcoholic returning to the bottle is an instance of this. Here it should be realized that while the psyche of a child is immature at the lower face level, its middle and upper level face levels are still adult. This is borne out by recollections of childhood in which people knew what was going on about them, even though they may have been inarticulate children. This adult outlook comes from the self, that is the temporal, that oversees the psyche from its pivotal point on the tree. In most cases, memories of previous lives and their past relationships with members of their current family are forgotten. That is, they become unconscious. This, however, does not obliterate their reaction to these individuals. This is seen clearly in young children before they have acquired a well-developed ego to contain what they think, feel about, and would like to do to certain people. In the early days of Freudian psychology, many were shocked by the notion of infantile sexuality. The idea of a child desiring his mother's sexuality and hating his father or any other rival was unacceptable in the 19th century society that regarded psychology as unscientific. Today, such a view is not so shocking because we see sexuality in a climate of acceptance created, ironically enough, by Freud's work. However, what is not taken into account is the fact that the child may be expressing a adult desire through a intimate infantile body that has not the constraints of a mature ego. While a baby's body might be quite sexually inadequate, the adult psyche that inhabits it is not. So that the relationship between sons and mothers, you see, this is always the way it works. Boys tend to be closer to their mothers, and the daughters tend to be closer to their dads. And that's the way it should be, you see. But all dipole and electric complexes so beloved by Freudian may be more than the infantile sexual label hung on them. Seen as Kabbalistically, the infant psyche is a entity halfway, that is, between two worlds. It still reacts, even if unconsciously, to the karmic relationship it may have had with the family it has been born into, even if they had had no previous relationships. Such a highly dependent position most generate a sexual attraction that is often responded to by mothers and fathers who treat them quite differently from children of their own sex. While this can no doubt be attributed to the normal processes of parenthood at one level or another, it is sometimes quite noticeable how the rival parent is excluded from such intimacy. As one obviously father remarked on his relationship with his very young daughter, it is like having a, quote, love affair. Many of the old taboos to prevent such things were set up in every culture because the adult element in the child had been recognized. Child seduction and incest are more common than is generally acknowledged and not always initiated by the adult. The relationship between the child and his parents and the way they work out these sexual tensions have a profound effect upon the formation of the ego and the attitude towards the principles of male and female. Such factors as a male psyche in a female body, or vice versa, are bound to be a influence as are these involving previous and present karmic relationships that are to be worked out. So in figure 24 is what they call relationships. These are crucial in the conditioning of a child. If they are without any such archetypes as a father, the young and even an unfulfilled adult will seek a figure who will fill this missing role in their life. This may take the form of older friends, teachers, and those in superior ranks. They can also occur in lovers and spouses where the dominant partner takes on the empty role. This principle applies equally to the archetype of family, the substitute being a gang, club, or formal institution. That's from Haleve. Besides the issue of sexuality, which is traditionally associated with Yesod, Y-E-S-O-D, both in the body and psychologically tree, in that one presents a masculine or feminine image to the world, there is the generation of identity. This is formed by the processes of interjection and projection in the former, the Yesada faculty of the ego to preserve or to perceive images, observers, and umbilicals from its birth, the various qualities of its parents. This is seen in the epithelium likeness to one or the other that the child takes on as he grows a personality. Certainly there will be particular genetic characteristics, but what is more than often noticed is the exact mimicking of parental expressions and movements that reveal a remarkable level of imitation. Clearly, to imitate a beloved person is quite natural, but so too is the tendency to echo those we fear and hate in order to acquire their power. This characteristic is part and parcel of the highly imaginative process at work in the young Yasod, which then projects what has been observed into play as the child learns to be an adult. Such interjection and projection not only go into the more superficial structure of the ego, but also deep into the unconscious to form a whole series of complexes made of myriads of any experiences of the world about them. Added to the personal level of identity are not only parental characteristics, but the absorption and acquisition of a whole culture represented by the family in which they live. Thus, the little Jewish boy remembers the Passover ceremony in his parents' home, with all the customs and atmosphere, which from the model for when he has a family of his own, while the little English girl will reproduce in later life. Every detail of how someone or her class entertains her husband professionally cognites, you see, grandparents play a particularly important part in the making of a cultural identity. Of course they do. The phenomenon of the special relationship between grandparents and grandkids occurs because neither is so deeply preoccupied with life as the parents, you see. They're not caught up in having to work and the grind of life somewhat. And so they have a different type of affinity with the child so that they are communicated directly, soul to soul. This connection is enhanced by the fact that a child is not fully incarnated and the old are slowly disincarnating. Thus, it is possible for their psyches to connect more easily, to transmit and receive at the deeper levels of the family and its collective experience. The wise old man and woman in a child's life always leaves a profound impression of roots and destiny. The Freudian view of infantile sexuality could be seen Kabbalistically as the period in which the dot, that is your dot is knowledge, and yesod of the body and psyche unite and coordinate the muscle, nerve, and organ triads with the psychological action, thinking, and feeling processes. In this, the oral, anal, and oedipa phases that are passed through, then the first two around the 6th year reveals a distinct progression of the tree. First, the body, yesod, or autonomic systems, uses the oral senses of touch and taste to explore the world. Then the body's temporal or central nervous system, which is also the makut of the psyche, learns to control the anal processes in an act of will. Finally, the dot-yasada level of ego, where sexuality and identity are established, relates to the Oedipa connection with the parents. The oral stage of biting or sucking the breast, which is said generally is the deprived cases, such attitudes are sarcasm or never having enough might. However, be consistent in the light of a past life relationship. So too could the anal battle of the potter, Potty, in which the child first exerts his will against the parents, who perhaps represents a ancient conflict with power and authority that has been carried over to this life. Likewise, the Oedipa problem of boys and the electro difficulty for girls may go back to now forgotten fates that have to be worked out in this life. All that has been ascribed of these earliest of years must be seen against this under background of fate. Too many psychologically focus upon, too many of them that is, focus upon a particular level. The Aristotelians only see the effects, and the Platonists, that is Plato and Aristotle, only the causes. So you get two sides of the effect here, you see. Somewhere in between lies the most comprehensive picture. In Kabbalah, we take into account the interaction of all the worlds, even though we may be examining one particular point or level, function, or stage of activity. Thus, for example, the withdrawal of infantile sexuality into a state of latency is seen as a shift of emphasis from Yesod to Hod, H-O-D. The lunar stage of babyhood with its mother orbiting ego now gives way to the age of Mercury, or true childhood, with its intense activity and insatiable curiosity. Here begins the Korean use of symbols that have slowly been accumulated in the infantile ego. This is when a baby gurgling moves into words and phrases and then are up to become language. Let us trace this development from its inception in order to gain an insight into the Hodian process of learning. And that's the next chapter, will be chapter 19. So I'm going to take a break tonight. I don't know if I'm going to do another talk. We'll see how I feel here in a few minutes, but I probably won't. I'm just going to probably take it easy. Thank you for being here. I hope all is well with you guys. And appreciate you listening. Hope this is, again, this is key to understand. Okay, I have a question here. Tyler Courtley, 2266, 729. What book is this, friend? Okay. The book is from something called Psychology and Kabbalah. The same author wrote this book also here, and it's much deeper. Me and Phil actually last week did a program on this particular book here, and he says this is a much more profound book and deeper, and it is. It has a lot of symbols in it that most of us have never even seen. So if that makes any sense to you, Tyler, thanks for the reading. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, you have a good night, okay, Tyler? You take care, and you do well, okay? All right, take care, guys. We'll talk to you soon.